Welcome to The Space, a virtual show that focuses on Africa's contributions to knowledge. I have been fortunate to have met and even worked with so many amazing people of African descent, composers of African operas and art music, visual artists, museum curators, creators of experiential media and virtual productions, choreographers, musicians, art collectors, and cultural specialists who succinctly explain Africa's contributions to knowledge. Join me once a month at the space to learn more about how the African spirit is preserved in the arts. Register on Eventbrite to be one of our virtual audience. See you at the space, a place for me and you on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Joyce Adewumi. Welcome to the space. We have a very special program for you today in honor of Women History Month and NGO CSW 65, the civil society side of the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which is currently running over 700 programs parallel to the official session taking place at the UN headquarters. We are indeed honored to have two women who play key roles at the United Nations with us today to educate, inspire, and get us fired up to make positive changes in this world. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Tricia Callender. She is NGO CSW Antiracism Committee Chair, a sociologist with a long career in several UN agencies. She is the Global Coordinator for Civil Society Advisory Group. She's also a member of NGO Committee on Migration, National Council of Negro Women, and a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority. Here's another phenomenal woman, Pamela Morgan. She is chair of Zonta International UN Committee. Her involvement with NGO committees includes the NGO on Migration Subcommittee on Xenophobia and Social Inclusion, Working Group on Women, the International Association of Women in Radio and TV, and NGO Committee on Aging. Today, we are talking about anti-racism, anti-Blackness, international developments, and Black maternal health. Ladies, my distinguished ladies, welcome to the space.
Thank you, Joyce.
Dr. Callender, please tell us more about your work.
Why did I have to go first? Okay. That was not the script, Joyce.
Script.
I think to explain the work I'm doing now, it helps to explain the journey, because anti-racism is sort of one on a long continuum of really trying to understand the world and yourself. I started off studying educational policy in South Africa. It really was that simple. I was not doing this at all. And I was working with an organization, and they were supposed to pick me up from the airport. I'd flown there to do some research for them. And when I landed, that's when the xenophobic riots were happening in South Africa. And so he said, you've got to lie down in the back of the car for your own safety. My colleagues, the other two were white. And I said, why would I lie down in the back of the car? He said, because you are in danger, they are not. And I thought, well, this is weird. I'm on the African continent. This doesn't make any sense. He said, well, you visibly are not white, so for your own safety. So anyway, we get to the hotel, we're sequestered for several days, and I'm watching I guess the powers that be really try to make sense of what was happening in South Africa, because yes, it was prejudice, and yes, it was discrimination, but it was not against white people. It was against Black people and brown people. And from there, I realized I needed a framework to unpack what was happening. And that's when I started to move into the anti-racism and DEI space. So I've carried that with me. That was 2006. I've carried that with me all the way up until now. And one of the things that we do not do particularly well in international development and nonprofit spaces is self-examination, because the work is so exogenous. You look outward, you don't really look at yourself. And there are a lot of systems and structures and tacit and explicit organizational design that prevent people from not only being their best selves, but in this case, we're talking about gender equality, actually impede the work. And so to that end, I think it took George Floyd and international outrage about that, things that we've been saying for years, Joyce. I mean, really, hundreds of years almost at this point. And now there is a little piece of daylight, there's a little space. And so my main responsibility is working with the civil society advisory group at UN Women. But I undertook this because I thought it was important, because I don't want to be the only one in these spaces that's making this point. We are talking about, we did not have enough impact since Beijing 25 years ago. And here we are trying to regroup and recalibrate for women's equality. And there's a whole swath of women that are being left behind, silenced and diminished within the space. And if that's happening within the space, how can you advocate effectively outside of the space to change governments and private sector? So that is what brought me to this, and that's what we're hoping to do with this space. Hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you have. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Miss Miss Pamela Morgan. Now, the vision of Zonta International, the vision is a world in which women's rights are recognized as human rights, where women have access to all resources and occupy decision-making positions on an equal basis with men, and where no woman lives in fear of violence. How does your work with Zonta International at the UN tie in with this anti-racism theme?
Joyce, I think that you've described it aptly, that I came to my work at the UN after I lost my husband, and I had to make a decision on what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I decided that I wanted to help to form a world where my granddaughters would be able to thrive. And I know it sounds hokey and it's a small step. One person in reality cannot make an effective change, but we can all contribute and try to build a critical mass of people who want to do away with misogyny and the stereotypical behaviors that women face. So my work with Zonta International is human rights work. Zonta is an organization with 28,000 members in 63 countries, where everyone is working towards the same goal of uplifting the status of women. So my work at the UN is to do precisely that.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're
All right,
welcome.
Dr. Calendar, we're coming back to you. Now, we're talking about racism. What is racism and why is it different from diversity, equality, and inclusion?
Mm-hmm. I understand in the continuum, the one we were talking about before, where DEI, as it's called in the field, was necessary to get us to this point. But it is really, it's the tricycle before you get on the bicycle. So DEI works in a polarity, a bifurcation, if you will, that there is white people and then there's everyone else, and the everyone else is being oppressed, or white men really, and everyone else is being oppressed, right? But what that does, it's very easy to do that statistically. I say this as a sociologist because you're comparing A with B. But anti-racism asks for more nuance. Anti-racism looks at, for example, how white women can oppress brown women in a workplace, or how brown women can oppress Black women in a workplace or in a social situation. It it digs into those nuances that we all knew were there, but we pretended they weren't so that we could advance the larger movement. And then we'd get to all of those complicated pieces later. Well, it turns out that we couldn't get to them later. They were actually front and center. And so anti-racism asks everybody to examine themselves. It asks for a more honest assessment, which is messier, right? It's, well, you're oppressed, but you can be an oppressor. And you can see people actually struggling with it. But I think ultimately it's way more honest. Beyond that, it then becomes you're against racism, which being anti something is an action, right? It is an action. It's a definite stance. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a theory. So when you are talking about being anti-racist, you have put a stake in the ground and say, I am against this thing, which then requires action. So ultimately, DEI is creating situations where you can sort of have the conversation, but anti-racism is the next step where then everybody is responsible to varying degrees for actions that dismantle racism. It also puts front and center that racism is the issue, not necessarily a person or a person's particular ethnic background. So if you are anti-racist, you are against racism. It doesn't mean you're against white people. It doesn't mean you're against Black people. It means you are against racism. And so to that end, it's something that calls everybody in instead of calls everybody out. So it is more complicated, but ultimately it leads to more results. It's complicated, it's expensive, but it leads to more lasting results. And that's been shown in social science research all over the place. It's a tougher operational paradigm, but if you are really trying to make changes, it is imperative, which is why we chose to call this committee anti-racism and not DEI, because it was about action. We were sitting there with a bunch of activists, so therefore it made sense to have something action-oriented. And I'm very pleased with that decision. I think it was the right one.
Okay, thank you. Now, according to Professor Ibram X. Kendi, Director of Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at American University, racist policies yield racist inequity, right? And anti-racist policies yield racial equity. This seems to be a very easy way to identify racism in our policies. As countries of the world are trying to achieve the sustainable goals identified by the UN, and reduce inequality is one of these goals, can't government just use Professor Kendi's analysis of racist and anti-racist policies as a measurement for the examination of these current policies and the formation of new ones?
Is that question for me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think there is a lot of truth to that, Dr. Kendi's approach. I don't think it's the full story. We have had racist policies and we've had ostensibly race-neutral policies. We have not had anti-racist policies yet. We've had anti-racist discussion. And so to that end, we cannot talk about policies that have been imagined but not yet enacted and then use those as hard, unassailable fact. We actually don't know what an anti-racist government looks like. We don't know what anti-racist policy looks like, because policy in and of itself, on paper, that's not really the policy, it's how it's enacted. And so the environment that we're working in at every stage, I mean, even the language that I'm speaking in right now, that is racist, right? There's no reason physically why I should really be speaking English. There isn't. So there's a history to even the way that I'm communicating. So it is really hard to make the case for something that is the aspirational goal that we haven't yet seen and say, well, this is what we should be doing. We're still in the process of imagining what that might be. And I'm not disparaging the goal of anti-racism, obviously not. That's something that I work on, but it is really hard to say that it is that simple. And that's in it. The trick with this is that everybody wants it to be simple so that they can explain it. It is complicated. It is messy. Race is complicated. It is messy. Gender is complicated. It is messy. Intersectionality makes it even messier. I think we have to stop looking for the quick answer or the elevator pitch for something that is really, it's like trying to hug a bowl of Jello. It really is complicated, and we have to embrace that that complexity in order to move things forward. Now, that being said, I appreciate where Dr. Kendi has gone with this. He's pushed the conversation forward, but there have been many, many Black women that have been talking about anti-racism from the late 70s, early 80s that are not being cited, right? They've been talking about intersectionality since 1982. That in and of itself, now there's that layer of gender and race. And so where are they in the conversation? So even adopting him as sort of the face of anti-racism in and of itself is not necessarily accurate or intersectional. So we don't know what that looks like. So what I would urge is that we look at the past, present, and future of anti-racism and be inclusive about how we define it, understanding that it might be different in different contexts, and then from there try to create a policy rather than wholesale adopting something that one person has said.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So I'm going to ask you again, I'm going to go further with you on this theme of anti-racism. Now, and you said we need to go further back. So I'm going to go further back. The continent of Africa, for example, was invaded by Arabs and Europeans who held ideas that Black people were genetically and biologically inferior. Basically, that Black people have stupid genes. This led to the reduction of human beings to personal possessions, justifying the millions of Africans who were bought and sold as goods. Even in this present day, Black people are still fighting to be recognized as equals. The killing of George Floyd, was that as a result of racism or anti-Blackness?
They're the same. Anti-race, anti-Blackness is a form of racism, just like chicken is a form of food, for those of you who are not vegetarian. It is a form of anti-racism. I understand my own personal bias, but I feel like it is if not one of the most odious forms of anti-racism. Everything under that umbrella, all the prejudice under that umbrella is odious. But it's so hard to disaggregate this because there's a socioeconomic status as well that one needs to consider, which is why the maternal health panel that we're doing at the UN is so important, because it is the only sector or the only issue where you can clearly, as a researcher and a policymaker, disaggregate between socioeconomic status and race. It doesn't matter. You could be Beyonce, you could be Serena Williams, you could have $6 gazillion in the bank and walk into a hospital, and your outcome as an expectant mother is going to be considerably worse than a white person who doesn't have those financial means. So to that end, I would not, they're not one or the other. Anti-Blackness is a form of racism. But we also have to examine the socioeconomic aspects where there was a history of slavery in the country before the Arabs arrived. We have not, and I don't mean we as Black people, I mean we as the world, have not treated each other well. There's no point in history where there's not been slavery. I mean, you can go way back. And so it could be argued that's a socioeconomic inequality that was then racialized by the Arabs, that was then taken to the next level by the Europeans. So what anti-racism does is exactly that. It unpacks it to that degree, as opposed to saying, well, these people came in, everything was fine, these people came in and then this thing happened. What were the social determinants? What was the social environment that was fertile ground to codify this type of inequality and then act on it by enslaving people en masse? Those are the kinds of questions that anti-racism asks. A DEI question would probably be, why did this happen? Why are they racist? And that is part of getting to that whole. Hope I was clear.
Yeah, this is going to require really in-depth conversation. 1 hour is not really going to be sufficient to discuss this, but we will continue because I would like Pamela Morgan to talk about Black maternal health, which you mentioned. Yesterday, I watched a video about a Black woman. She happens to be Nigerian in Belgium. She went to the hospital to remove fibroids so that she can have children. And they messed up her cervix.
Mm.
Then she brought in her sister-in-law because she couldn't have children anymore. They could not reconstruct the cervix effectively enough for her to carry a child. So she brought in her sister-in-law to be a surrogate mother. And the woman came to Belgium, had the baby. They destroyed her cervix, destroyed her. So in the United States, Pamela, Black and Indigenous women are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from complications of pregnancy and birth than white women. Studies show that 60% of these deaths are preventable. Can you provide an example of projects employed by local Zonta clubs to assist in the area of Black maternal health?
Joyce, our work is predominantly international, and we have spent 10 years working with obstetric fistula with women in Liberia. We additionally have ongoing projects where we send birthing kits to various countries in Africa, Haiti, and other nations to assist in sanitary conditions and having very, very sound sanitary conditions during the birthing process. Zontians in Africa are very much focused on the support that women in their countries need as far as maternal health. We are one of the supporters of the Antiracism conversation circle on maternal health because we know that we have not done enough and that we need to be in the conversation on how to move things forward.
Okay, thank you. I was reading the questions in the chat because I also want people to ask their questions. So feel free if you have questions to put them in the chat. I know someone asked what is DIE. We've already treated that.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we're going back. Dr. Callender, why should anti-racism go global, and why hasn't it gone global?
I think it hasn't gone global for the reasons that I described. I don't think we've had the conceptual framework to really unpack it, to harken back to my example about South Africa. South Africa was a story about Black versus white. And so when it was, and they were calling it xenophobia, really it was Afrophobia, let's be honest, right? When it was Afrophobia, then there was really no way to make sense of it. It was Black and Black. And it was just like, well, what's going on here? And so I think we need to care about it because just because we have these very neat policy and sociological categories doesn't mean that's how the world works. And so if you're using, a scale to measure height, yes, it measures something, but it's not the thing that you're trying to measure. It's the wrong scale. We need to have something that is contextual and unpacks all of the layers. You have to be completely honest about and understand fully what the whole phenomenon is in order to solve it. And so for anti-racism, there are frameworks. I won't bore everybody with all of the social science detail, but there are frameworks to understand how racism and how inequality plays out in different contexts without there being a standard. There should be this, there should be diversity, there should be equity, inclusion. Inclusion could be, for example, let's just say that there's a table and all of the white men and women are at the table and you're at the table and then the three of us are at the table cleaning it. And they could say in that room, there were 3 Black women, but what are you actually doing when you're in that room? And we know this from working in the international space. This is unusual. People are not ready for this conversation. We have these panels, we have policy discussions, and then people like Joyce, Pam, and myself will have to decompress with each other after because we've seen all of the dynamics that are going on. And we just take that as normal. We shouldn't have to do that. And it prevents really good people from entering our space and it impedes our work. So we need to care about it because we've missed the mark on a lot of different things. I was one of the people that worked on the United Nations SDGs in 2013. I actually I manage the addressing inequalities consultation. So every time you see the word inequality in there, that's in part a direct result of that work. And we've not met it at all. We're not even close. We have these beautiful targets, indicators, goals. It's beautiful. It's sparkling. It's rhinestones and diamonds. But if we really want to stop talking and start doing with the goal of making ourselves obsolete because the world is better, then it is imperative that we embrace intersectionality. It is imperative that we embrace the complications and the complexity, and it is imperative that we look at that in order to solve the real problem. And that is why we need to care about anti-racism, because if you care about international development, you want to do this work and you want people to be treated fairly. I don't know of any other paradigm that does that as well as this one.
Well, people say that is because of self-interest that
Mm-hmm.
racism exists. What do you say?
Yes. So one word answer, yes. Um, these codes of conduct and who's intelligent and who's not. I mean, I was thinking the other day, this is going to be a very silly example, but it's Saturday, so it doesn't matter. And I looked at the idea of money. I was just, I don't know why, I guess because I needed more. And I just thought of the idea of money and I thought, okay, so someone decided that gold bars, or in this case, not so much anymore, were valuable and that became money. Why couldn't it be the ability to dance? Why couldn't it be leaves? You know, it was something that someone else decided, and that someone else, that was in their self-interest. Everything we do is in our self-interest to some degree or another. Even us having this conversation now, we are all here and we are all varying shades of Black women, but we are Black women and we're doing this work because, as Pam said, she wants her daughter to have a better world. I'm advocating for myself and people who look like me. You know, I mean, everybody is working their self-interest. There's a reason why the NGO CSW 65 conference, for the majority of the 2 weeks that we're having it, I mean, now we're closing in on week 1, it's mostly women. People are working in their self-interest. But what we do need to do is make the case that anti-racism is good for everybody. So far, we focus on dialogue and moral imperative. I'd like to shift the conversation to it's impeding our results. If we, it is in your best interest, even if you were not a person of color, to do this work because it's impeding your results. And so when you make it a moral imperative or an awareness exercise, what you're doing is you're sort of making it voluntary and separate to your work. It needs to be tied in.
Okay, I have to go. I have to ask one more question regarding that before we go to Pam. Now, when you're saying it's you know it's a moral issue, my question then is, why are the religious leaders not talking about this?
Mm-hmm. Do you really want me to answer that honestly?
Yes, I do. Let's talk.
Okay, because they are imbued with racism too. You can't be on a sandy beach and rolling around in it for your entire life and not get sand in your shoe and in your clothes. You know, I mean, it's in everything. Even again, the way we're communicating. I'm using a computer where it says Intel and in Core i7, I guess this is. That's in English. You know, these are not everything. What I'm wearing now, this is not. You know, this is a bodysuit of some kind. That's not what I would normally wear if things had gone the way that, you know, they were supposed to go. So it is literally in the fabric of everything that we do, and it is so invisible because we take it as normed. And so to suggest another way seems disruptive, and human beings by nature are comfortable with order, even if that order is oppressive even to them. The idea of upturning order is very scary. And so there may be people who are good people, but they're racist. There may be people who are anti-racist that may not be so pleasant to be around. You know, I mean, it's not a hallmark of a good person. And so that's why when I spoke earlier, I talked about results and your own self-interest and changing the societal fabric as opposed to pleading a case and having a discussion. I've made a very deliberate move away from that because then in that case, it becomes, are you a nice person, as opposed to, are you uprooting systems? And I think we have not, and I mean we, everybody working in this international development space, have not adequately made that change. We still think good people do X, bad people do Y. And the religious leaders the same. I'm a good person. I pray. I lead this flock. I've had so many sacrifices. I've done so many things for my church, and I'm a good person. This couldn't possibly be me. But you've been rolling around in the sand called life for 40, 50, 60 years. You have sand in your shoe. Nobody wants to hear that. So there's a fair amount of self-examination that we do not do when it comes to this, because not only are we trying to upturn societal systems so that there's equity, you've got to upturn yourself. That can be scary.
Yes, and I'm going to say something. I'm going to boldly say something.
Mhm.
Missionaries, you are racist. Because when you go into Africa and you tell Africans that the way that they are living is not right and they should embrace your own culture, your own religion to the detriment of theirs, you are racist. And I'm saying it now. And every Black person who goes with them to Africa to convert
Mhm.
the Blacks, the Africans, you are racist. You are an instrument of racism, and you need to check yourself because you are destroying your people, your culture, to the fact that when you go to Africa, many people don't even know what it is to be African. What is the sense, the essence of an African? What is the African culture? There is this belief that God created as African, left them in Africa, and then told the white people to come and civilize them. We need to stop that. That's racist.
Mhm.
Okay. Sorry, don't get me riled up this morning. Okay.
Oh, I mean, I agree with you 100%. I mean, sadly, you know what's interesting?
Mhm.
We're somewhat participating in this too. We're trying to turn it around on its head. But the very first international development humanitarian workers were missionaries.
See,
The truth.
see,
Hmm.
let's abolish it. If you want to go to Africa to help, you go there with the mind to help the people who are equal to you,
Hmm.
not that they are beneath you, not that they are uncivilized. They have their own ways of doing things. The
Hmm.
ethnomusicologist John Blacking said every society has its own way of doing, seeing, and being. So why should everyone try to be European, be American, be British? Why?
Hmm.
Why can't we study the various cultures and accept that every culture is valid?
Hmm.
Okay. All right. So we leave that. um, okay. Pam. All right. Oh yeah. Some people are writing something, but let me just read this one. Oh, wow. It was a great morning. So let's go back to Black maternal health. So because of the rate of Black women who die from complications of pregnancy and birth, we need to demand accountability, birth justice, and legal guarantees for safe, respectful, anti-racist care. So Pam, has Zonta International worked with UN agencies on issues related to Black maternal health and helping to change these policies that are um, just destroying Black women?
Absolutely. Zonta has partnered with UNFPA, the Population Fund, for over 15 years and working to help with maternal health of women, particularly in Africa. Uh, Issues that have come about as a result of early child marriage and the ways that having children at too early of an age impacts the body. So we have spent over $7 million to help with education, working with the community in rethinking uh, how young girls' bodies are affected with child marriage and using the model of having the men in the community work for the development of programs and processes that allow young women to thrive, bringing money into the family with educational programs. And our educational programs cover financial literacy as well as sexual and reproductive health in order to build a stronger community where the generational levels of community all benefit from the ways that the young women are beginning to see themselves. We also partner with UNICEF in education programs. UNICEF is the United Nations children's educational program. And we partner with them again on education programs. We have invested over $5 million in Madagascar in girls' education in order to help them rethink their role and to be contributors to their society, giving them the types of education that can allow them to bring money in, erasing the poverty that is prevalent in the community. So our partnership with UN Women actually does similar programming. So we're one of the few organizations that puts our money where our mouths are. And we try to work with the various agencies in order to improve the plight of women.
Thank you so much. As you were speaking, I thought about something. Among the Yoruba people, this is a sidebar. Among the Yoruba people, the traditional belief among the Yoruba people says, I'm going to do a transliteration. Let us honor women. Let us bow down to women. Yes, let us prostrate to women, because it's the women who gave birth to us. It is the women who made us men. So there is this idea that women should be venerated, basically, in the Yoruba tradition, ancient Yoruba tradition. But however, with the advent of the missionaries, that tradition has been eroded to the extent that women are not even considered to be on the same level as men anymore. I'm just saying this to talk about the damage that foreign influence has had on the traditional African way of viewing women, and which has led to these child marriages and the violence against women, because they're no longer venerated. All right, sidebar. There is a question that's come in. I want to honor the person who put this question in. The question is, how can we approach and remedy the Europeanization of education? Any of you can take that question?
Pam, do you want to go first and I can follow, or other way around? What would you prefer?
Why don't you go first?
Okay. Now, one of my favorite authors is Audre Lorde, with an E. E for excellent, fantastic. And no, I really love her. And one of the things that she says is, you cannot use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. We are walking into a situation, and if you look at education, it's really interesting. There is a sociologist named Jean Annion who did a study in the late 80s and early 90s of different types of school by socioeconomic strata. And she watched not what the outcomes were on paper with the tests, but just how the interactions were happening in the schools. And depending on socioeconomic status, the interactions were very different. So for example, the rich kids, they basically told the teachers what to do. The upper middle class kids, they told the teachers what to do, but there was a little pushback by the teachers. And as it went down, most of it was, there was more and more authority, the less and less money that you had. And what does that sound like? It sounds like society, right? It is really, schools are a reflection of society. You can walk into school and I can tell you who the haves are, who the have-nots are, who's going to succeed, who's not going to succeed without anybody saying a word. I could just walk into a classroom, you could turn the sound off, and I would be able to tell you that. And I'm not special, anybody can do that. It's because the school is set up to replicate the society. So it's not a Europeanization of education. It is a contextual education that makes perfect sense for the society. And so the question really then becomes, what do we do? What do we do? Why are we, where are our supplemental education structures to help kids have the conversation that we're having now when they're 10, 11 years old? One thing that I do like, I went to a school in a section of Brooklyn called Mill Basin when I was growing up, which was primarily a Jewish school, primarily a Jewish school and primarily a Jewish area. And one thing that I love that they did is every Saturday they had Hebrew school. They taught Hebrew, but they taught all kinds of other things about their culture. They were not dependent on that structure to teach the culture and to teach the indigenous language. And I would love, I mean, I hate to grab from other people and say they've done something well that we haven't, but if there is food for thought there, rather than going into school to try to learn, and then you have to unlearn all those things that you've learned because they dehumanize you. Where are our supplemental education structure? Where is our agency in developing our children? And where is the message that you go into school, and this is going to be a controversial statement, to get something so that you can then apply it to your own life and your own community, as opposed to thinking that school is going to fulfill and be honest and be fair and be equitable, where no other structure in society is like that. So I would twist the question a little on its head. Rather than the Europeanization of education, where are our supplemental structures to tell our own story to our children?
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Absolutely. Trisha is one of my favorite social psychologists because she knows that I can sit and listen to her forever. And it's interesting that you brought up Jean Anion because I used to talk to Jean a lot while she was doing that research. And she was white and she had a understanding that even a lot of Black educators did not have about the process. But as far as I'm concerned, COVID has been a game changer. COVID has revolutionized education. And for those people who are sincere in wanting to remedy the Europeanization of education, this is the time to do so. Because education is at a crossroads and it's no longer going to be what it has been. I don't believe we will ever have 100% attendance in school. I don't believe that we will ever have the curriculum presented as it has been. This is a time for people to come together, determine what the curriculum is that you think should be taught, and utilize the technologies in place at this time, whether it's Zoom or Google Meets or whatever, to implement it. You know, I think we have a bad habit of expecting that our answers are going to be solved by other people. And I think that it's up to us to take the bull by the horn and implement the strategies that we think should be in place. For us to think that a board of education is going to do what needs to be done, I think is a bit naive. So it's up to each of us to do what has to be done.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And our audience, thank you for that question. The space is a new program. And what it does, as I said, is to focus on the contribution of people of African descent. One of the things that we're going to be doing is exactly what you just talked about. We're going to have an alternative teaching. We're going to have people from Africa who are custodians of the culture come and talk to us about spirituality and culture, not from the perspective of Europeans, but from African perspective. So that, stay tuned for that. That's going to come up in April. And it's going to be a series that's going to last for whenever, as long as whenever. Okay, so I'm excited about that. So we have another question from one of our attendees. She writes, he writes, we have had this race problem between white and black since our first meeting. Excuse me one second. Sorry, it just moved. You know how it is when questions pops up. Okay, since our first meeting of each other, do you all recommend the answer is separation of the races or more of what Dr. King wanted us to do? That is, love white people more and win them through love. Anyone want to take that question on?
Pam is gonna make me go first. I can tell from the look on her.
Of course, Pam.
This goes on at work. This goes on at work too, y'all. This is how this is how this goes with Trish. It's like Trish.
Trisha is my teacher.
Oh, please. No, it's the other way around. Please,
She's
please.
all our, is our teacher.
Aging me. Okay, so here's the thing. I don't necessarily, I mean, the indicators are pretty clear. We own more houses, we had more self-determination, and I think there's something that's really hard to quantify. We seem to have more pride back in the day. I mean, I was talking to a really powerful sister from South Africa yesterday. She's a human rights lawyer, and she was so upset. And I asked her, I said, girl, what's going on? And she said, you know what, I'm trying to educate these white women, blah, blah, blah. And I said, look at all of this energy. This woman is brilliant, brilliant. Makes all of us look like we can barely walk and when she's running. And she has spent her time and possibly her blood pressure and her health leading, no, honestly, because this is where this story ends up, right? Trying to educate people who have made it clear they don't want to be educated. You give them a bibliography, they're going to need one more book. You give them a conversation, then they need one more conversation. I said, sis, you need to start looking at this like it's violence, okay? You would never ask a white woman who was raped to sit around and have a discussion with rapists in hopes that they understand. That is ridiculous. You would never ask her to do that kind of trauma, but we're asked to do that. And worse yet, we ask each other to do it. So when people like me and Pam are like, yeah, we're good. There's a bibliography and there's Google. We're going to do some self-care here. Then we look crazy. So as far as the let's love everybody, that's true, but you love people. And I'm saying this is for me. I'm not suggesting this for anybody else. You love people based on how they treat you and make you feel and vice versa. And so it is a case-by-case basis. I have very, very dear friends of all different types. And I sound like some of my best friends are white, right? But all different types. But as far as curating people because of who they are and bringing them into my space, you kind of already have to be there. And that may sound harsh, but it is self-care. And I'm carrying a lot of generational trauma, just like every Black person. And so I'm going to take care of myself. However you feel about that, okay, right? I don't know. And I think that's a question that I've struggled with as well, that the questioner just asked. I don't have the answer. And it's something that I have been grappling with for years because those indicators are clear. But on the other hand, you know, even I myself have been rolling around in the sand. What would that look like for me? I'm not even sure. So I guess my ultimate long circuitous answer is I don't really know, but I do know that quantitatively we had less debt, we had more homes, we had, at least to some degree, our own schools. You know, we were able to, at least that aspect of it was good. And what ended up happening is every time we tried to move forward, it would be like the move bombing. They'd bomb and raise the place, and then we'd have to start from scratch. And so it turned into let's integrate. And by integrating, it was like, oh, we'll sit next to these white people and by osmosis we'll be equal. Well, I think history has borne out that that is not the case. And we've spent a lot of time educating and getting autoimmune diseases as a result, and diabetes and this and obesity. All of those are trauma responses. And so I don't have the answer. I know what it looks like on paper, but I myself have not even been able to fully imagine that. I've been rolling around in the sand too.
Oh, preach. Well, Miss Pam.
You said go first.
Trish is always a hard act to follow, and I know I can't do that. However, I know that we've all been rolling around in the sand. I was raised in the 1950s, and my experience with growing up was that even though the African American people in my community did not have college degrees, they had dignity and respect and a work ethic and love. They had love between husbands and wives and love for children. So I grew up in a warm and nurturing place. And my focus more on living Dr. King's dream or living a separatist reality. And I have during my lifetime considered both. I think at this point, I'm more concerned with creating a safe space for my grandchildren and creating the type of future where they will be able to use whatever gifts they've been given to thrive. So I'm working from here. I don't have as much time left as I've had going forward. So I know that I have to be very realistic in my work and what I try to leave with my family. And I just think that we need to be very clear about our expectations and very clear about the type of future life that we want for our descendants.
Thank you both. Thank you both. Well, wow, time is gone. Can't believe this.
Like, is it
Well,
really 12:55?
can
That's
you
crazy.
imagine that? We still have so much to cover.
Mhm.
Yeah, Joyce, can I suggest
Mm,
that Trisha come back
mhm.
to your show? Trisha
Joyce, do you
has,
see what's happening? Do you see what's happening, Joyce? Do you see what's happening? I agree with you, Pam. I'd be happy to do this with you again.
Are we going to have the same thing going on?
Yeah, we are. We are. Yeah.
but you know, it's really a gift to meet a woman like Trisha. And I did not know Trisha before this COVID pandemic. And COVID has given us the best of times and the worst of times. And it is a gift to have met someone with her intellect, with her ability to articulate, and with her keen eyesight. Vision is not given to everyone. Everyone with a PhD does not have vision. But Trisha is one of those rare individuals that does and who has the courage to go forward. So I really do suggest that you bring her back. And if you want, Trisha, I'll be on there to clap. But we need to have an educator in our midst who can help our community, our global community. And I would just want to make that recommendation.
Thank you. You've really embarrassed me. My face is bright red now.
No,
Thank
no embarrassment. I also have to talk about Pam. Pam is a one in a million woman. Because of Pam, I met you and I met these fascinating women who are running the CSW. I had no idea. I'm sitting in the midst of phenomenal women who are doing things. Pam, I asked myself, how did I get here? Even
deserve to
meeting,
be here.
even meeting
Absolutely.
Pam. No, I am so humbled. Even meeting Pam through my film, I don't know how she found me, and she's been so supportive. I remember when you were having this panel on the AKA and how, the work of the AKA sorority is to lift women up. My mind went to Pam and what she's done for me, you know? And I think we need to have more women like that. She's so humble, she's so humble. She's always ready to put someone on a platform, on a pedestal,
Mhm.
so that they can shine. So, because of that, Pamela, you shine. You
Thank you.
shine. You're a
Thank you.
queen. Thank you
Thank
Mhm.
so
you.
much.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
So, we will talk about coming back.
Mhm.
We have to do this. We do have to educate our community, especially in the maternal, anti-racism, how we can fix it. If we can fix it, we have to start from ourselves, you know, um, how we think, what we're thinking about, and not be pawns,
Mhm.
you know, and
Mhm.
also talk about maternal health, Black maternal health. That's killing our women. and disfiguring them. And it starts from birth. It starts from birth. So wow, I'm full. It's been a pleasure to have you, fantastic women here at the space. I have learned a lot from both of you today, and I'm sure that our viewers have as well. So last thoughts, and
May
how
I say
can,
one thing before we
yes,
go?
yes, last thoughts, and how can
Mhm.
viewers reach you? Go
Um,
ahead. Mhm.
yes, first I'm going to put in the chat the link, if I can. There we go. The link to the maternal health session. I had forgotten to do that. It's on the 23rd of March, which is Tuesday, from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. We have really amazing doctors and doulas and academics, all women of color, that will be discussing this issue and how it should be central to a gender equality agenda in general. So I've put that in the chat. It is free to attend. And from there, you will also, once you play around with the site, see all of the sessions that are available to you over the course of the 2 weeks. Some are closed, most are open. Please feel free to walk into those spaces and make your voices heard. There's nothing secretive or fancy about what we're doing, and we need to stop all of this, drama and Sturm and Drang when it comes to the UN. It is supposed to represent the people, and this is what we need to do. So please walk into that space with your chest out and your voice loud. And we have 2 other anti-racism sessions remaining. We have one which is anti-racism plus, because of the intersectionality aspect of anti-racism, it demands it. So there's anti-racism and human trafficking, anti-racism and LGBT, anti-racism and anti-Blackness. Joyce, this may come as no surprise, I'm running that one.
Oh.
So there's going to be many of them, and a lot of them are run by youth on purpose, because they're going to be the ones carrying the mantle long after we're all gone. And then finally, there will be an anti-racism workshop, which has been curated and designed by Dr. Sonia Banks, of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Manhattan chapter. She's president. She's also a clinical psychologist that works on issues of race. Priya Kavam from Breakthrough International, which is an anti-racist organization, and myself. And it will be a training. We don't necessarily need a training. We're all 3 of us here are Black. But for those who do need training, that is the offering that we will give. One of the things with the anti-racism space that I wanted to curate, even anti-racism tends to be white supremacist because it's focused on changing white people as opposed to celebrating who we are. We also need to get some of the sand out of our shoes. And that is why I've a lot of the talk about it. And I wanted to set up a session to start it with the sorority session, for example, where I've highlighted approaches that have worked and things that we need to be proud of, as opposed to focusing only on white people. The anti-racism space is also for us. And if you are interested moving forward in participating in any of the UN discussions, conversations, and consultations, please make sure once you register, we'll have your name, and then we'll be able to send you things. And it won't be just me and Pam and Joyce banging down the door, but it'll be an army of us. And I thank you for taking a Saturday morning when you could have been doing anything else to sit here and listen to us. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, Joyce, I'm done talking, I promise.
Thank you. And Pam, last word, final words?
Yes, I'd like to thank you for hosting this. And I've put my email address and my website in the chat. I'm the originator, the founder of Women in Media Newark, which is an organization that advocates for and educates the public about global issues facing women using film, video, and new media. And on the 26th, we're having a conversation, a powerful conversation on the future, the post-COVID future for women. And it has a panel of 8 experts, women of color, who are going, and they're multidisciplinary. They come from all different fields, and they're going to dissect what is the future for women, what is the vision, and how are we going to approach it. So you can find out about it on the website, and please come, it's free. It's a Zoom conference. Please come and lend your voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, thank you, our viewers, for joining us today at the space. Please check out our upcoming interviews at www.thespaceseries.com. And don't forget to, I would say, drop us an email so that we can tell you the next time that we will be bringing back Trisha and Pam, because we have a lot to talk about and we would like to hear what you have to say as well. There are many questions in the chat that were not answered. I apologize for that. We will endeavor to answer those questions the next time this phenomenal women come back to educate us. Next week, Saturday, March 27th at 5 p.m., please join us to discuss African operas and art music with Bode Amajala, a Nigerian composer and musicologist. And I know that for many people, that's like, what? What is that? When you join us next week, Saturday, March 27th at 5 p.m., you'll understand. You'll learn more about what African operas and art music are. Your generous donations help us to continue bringing such amazing programs to your home. I thank you all for joining us today. My name is Joyce Adewumi. Thank you for your support and have a wonderful day, night, morning, wherever you may be. Thank you
Thank
from
you.
the space. Okay, bye.